Good evening, Michael and Cam. This is Anurag, and here we are again to discuss our ongoing topics of From Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, the series by John Vervaeke. And today we are here to discuss episodes 27 and 28, which starts getting into the foundations for relevance realization. So, would love for Michael, if you could set the frame for the episode 27,
Yeah, I
that
may
would
have
be
to have
awesome.
Cam do that for me because
I,
I actually, here's the mistake I made. I read 27 and 28. So instead of 20, wait a minute, 26 and 27, right? Is that what wait a minute.
No, we are discussing 27 and 28.
Oh, 28. Okay, so 27. Okay. Oh, so I have this marked wrong somehow. Okay. 27. Making sure I have the title right before I
It's called problem formulation.
problem formulation. Let's see. Oh, hold on. I think I'm confused still. Hold on 1 second. My notes here. Oh boy, this is a long document. There we go. 26 is cognitive science. Okay, so then problem formulation. Actually, well, Cam, do you say you just read this?
yep.
Why don't you launch this? Because I'm not
Okay.
feeling totally centered around this.
So I'll just quickly read off the transcript headings to get a little bit of a structure going, and then I'll tee up a couple of prompts for you
Yeah.
on thought process. So the section headers are combinatorial explosion,
Hmm.
heuristics and algorithms,
Okay,
praise for
good.
Newell and Simon, the naturalistic imperative of cognitive science, a critique of Newell and Simon, well and ill-defined problems, the mutilated chessboard,
Hmm.
and that's it.
Okay, I'm on the right spot. I just mislabeled this one. Okay, so this is gonna be a great one, I think. So let's see if I can summarize this in that scaffolding. So we have cognitive science of intelligence, right? Particularly through the work of Newell and Simon. And they conceptualize intelligence as the capacity to act as a general problem solver, right? Now I don't understand naturalistic imperative. Do you guys know what that means? That's one of the terms that he used in the
I don't remember for sure, but intuitively to me that means like it has to be observable, has to be measurable.
Oh, probably right. You probably yeah, that's right. It's not there. It's actually through experience, right? That you measure it. And do you guys know what the homuncular fallacy is?
Yeah,
Because
that's the little man inside the when you it's circular explanation.
okay, that's circular explanations. Um, so we're explaining this in mechanistic terms, and therefore it fit into the scientific worldview. That's what I understand how he framed that. So, and then essential to the concept is relevance realization, ability to discern critical information from the vast array of facts and possibilities, which is vital for managing what he calls the combinatorial explosion of potential problem spaces.
Yeah, you somehow he says that very phenomena is what fascinates him. Like it's what's driving
Yeah.
his work.
And
Like
by the way,
how do you do that? Explain to me how you do that. Explain to me how
right,
you
right. He says, and
no,
they tend to explain using the same. I mean, it doesn't work because they can't explain it without using like explain what a tree is. Well, you can't use the word tree, right?
yeah.
That kind of thing, right? Now the he distinguishes between heuristic and algorithmic processing, recognizing that our cognitive processes are adaptively designed to streamline decision making, right? So that's and of course that can lead to problems sometimes through bias and misjudgment. And then he also points out that Newell and Simon's model is not without limitations, and they even recognize that. if you're over reliant on heuristics, so which assumes a common essence among problems, right? So that, in other words, you use a certain heuristic response to things that are similar, but it doesn't always match. I think that's how I understood it.
Yeah, the categories. His criticism of their work was, I think, they made the assumption that all problems are essentially the same.
Yeah,
They're
right.
essential. Yeah, that was it. That essentialism piece of it.
And then he says that, that's underappreciating the complexity of problem formulation, which they didn't actually get. They didn't understand that the formulation of the problem itself is a huge piece of being able to solve it properly.
Yeah.
And because otherwise you will end up focusing on things that are irrelevant or too time consuming, or leading you to false what do you call it, conclusions, right? And I like how he says that converting, so it's a transformative tools, right, for converting ill-defined problems into well-defined ones through effective framing and reframing. I thought that was really helpful because he mentioned that a long time ago.
Can you repeat that, please?
Oh yeah, so he says that ill-defined problems are turned into well-defined problems through effective framing and reframing. So he talked about way back when we started that the job of the what do you call it, shaman, was to help people break frame and reframe so that they could be more effective at adapting to whatever's in front of them and to transcend and get to higher levels of being. And that's what he's saying here. So the problem, this process is essentially a rational cognitive functioning, moving beyond mere logic reasoning to incorporate psychotechnologies that enhance our problem-solving capacities. That's what I understood from it. And he also say it's recursive, which I think is interesting. That relevance realization is portrayed as a recursive self-organizing process that is fundamental not only to problem solving, but also to all aspects of cognitive intelligence. And it's essential for categorization, right? Which is allows us to navigate and interact with the world effectively. So that's my kind of take, the general gist of what you guys agree with that so far?
Yeah, that was a lovely summary. So then I would move then to our own independent thinking on it, like how and per the application of it, why it is that we're interested in this stuff, and then how are we applying it.
So I want to just tease out a few other insights from the same section, because this is where he's basically, why is he calling this whole section problem formulation? And what's the importance of problem formulation? And this is very interesting to me because typically when we talk about intelligence or intelligibility or rationality, we just go directly to say, here's problem A, and now I'm going to just attack it full on. And here are all the tools I have, and here is my cognitive methods that I'm going to apply, et cetera, et cetera. And what makes this interesting, the whole section, the whole chapter, is that he's saying, hang on, part of intelligence is selecting the right problem and formulating the right problem. Because if you're going to go from your initial state to some goal state, you need to have a very good sense of the goal state and the problems that you encounter. So I think the definition he starts with intelligence as a process of solving capacity to go from one state to another through series of transformations within constraints is an interesting one. But then he says, okay, since there is a lot of possible combinatorial explosion and you can't possibly, a limited human being can't possibly cover all the possible permutations, he starts by saying, okay, the method of algorithm, which is a systematic method of working through the search space, all possible combinations, is going to be extremely limiting because it's going to take forever for a certain algorithm to search through all the possible combinations and weigh them. And then he says shortcuts like heuristics are inherently biased. They might work, but they're going to lean you immediately, bias you immediately to certain set of answers that might already be like, based upon where your attention is drawn or some other criteria. So he's basically saying intelligence or intelligibility is about solving problems and getting somewhere new through the maze of billions of possible combinations. But we are extremely limited if we think it is just about applying rational capacity, deductive capacity to start going down the path of an algorithm that works or a shortcut that works. Both of those are limiting. And he basically says that therefore rationality, in both of those, you can make mistakes. In algorithm, because algorithm cannot possibly cover all search spaces in due time, wherever you choose to apply it and stop it, there'll be other answers unexplored. And in case of heuristic, you might have prior bias or starting point bias. Therefore, you will jump in and you might be wrong. So in both those cases, he says there is no getting around the fact that you will have to do error correction.
Right.
Error correction. And then so far, so good. But then it becomes, okay, we are at least smart, at least we are intelligent, at least we have a goal. And all we have to do is solve series of problems and we'll figure out how to correct the errors along the way. And therefore, that's a framework. But then he lobs a bomb and saying, not so fast. Because the very first step of solving any problem, regardless of whether you use algorithm or whether you use a shortcut heuristic, is to define the problem well. And if you're defining the problem well, maybe the error correction can happen reasonably well because you have grip on all the constraints and all the pathways. But if your problem itself is very poorly formulated, you can't get off the ground. So problem formulation becomes really a very hard thing because he's basically saying logic alone cannot help you with problem formulation, which is a really deep point. And then he says the only way to get to problem formulation in a fuzzy problem landscape is to have an insight. And insight is not possible through deductive process. To break frame is not possible through deductive process.
Right, because it's not linear.
It's not linear.
Right. Yeah.
So he's basically saying an algorithm or a heuristic is not going to generate an insight if you're stuck in an ill-formed problem. And using his earlier metaphor, you would have to literally take your frame off and put on new frames and generate a new insight from the same landscape to possibly attack the problem, which is ill-informed, in a new way, to make it well-informed or attack it in a different angle. So he's big into the fact that problem formulation depends on insight, and insight is not necessarily open to logic, and logic alone will not get you there.
That's really well framed, Anurag. Thank you. That's really well said and well summarized. So that's where he's poking at. He's saying the standard ways in which we solve problems aren't very reliable, 100%. And to actually break frame, you can't rely on logic alone. You have to go beyond that in some way, right?
And the mutilated chessboard is his example of that. If you mathematically started looking at all possible ways to solve the mutilated chessboard, it'll take you too long. Maybe not. But if you realize that all you've done is, move 2 squares and only 2 white squares were removed, and that insight comes and everything else is then explained.
Yeah.
So he's basically saying you have to step out. And he uses other examples along the way. But what I want to point out to you, which really blew my mind now that it's coming back to me about this particular chapter, is that Karl Popper has a very well-etched and informed view about epistemology and particularly of theory of knowledge, his whole theory of falsifiability. And he is exceptional in talking about how knowledge is all conjecture and error correction.
Who's this?
Karl Popper, Popper, one of the greatest philosophers of science of 19th century and ever. And he is actually one of the bedrock of what is called falsifiability theory, meaning if you can't falsify a set of hypotheses, then it's not a hypothesis, then it's not science. And he talks about if you make a prediction, you need to be able to falsify it for you to make improvement upon it. You need to be able to say under these conditions, this will be false. Otherwise, anything goes. Anyway, so he is considered, if you read him, which I've read bits of it, he is the foundational scientist or philosopher of science that talks about epistemology of how we know and what is scientific truth, right? Karl Popper, Popper. And what's interesting about his view of knowledge, which I am tying back to what Vervaeke is saying, is that Vervaeke is saying you need to not just simply have logical way of getting there. You need to have a way of generating insights that is outside of the or deductive process of breaking down a problem. And what Popper is saying is that the way to create a new knowledge is to have a conjecture, insight, right? So you can have a conjecture, but then you run experiments and correct the conjecture. And that course correction is what tells you whether you have confidence in the conjecture or not. So his view of science is that it's a series of conjectures, theories that come from insights that get validated through course correction, error correction, but as you run experiments. So, which is very interesting, because this is the kind of view that he's walking into, Vervaeke is walking into, without calling it out as a Popperian view. And,
Interesting.
And similarly, Karl Popper's primary focus when it comes to knowledge creation is problem solving. And he says the only way to talk about knowledge is a series of problems and knowledge solves. That's it, right? And this is also where Vervaeke's view of problem formulation is starting by saying, for any downstream relevance realization, any downstream understanding of any mechanism, you need to start with problem formulation. So this idea of problem formulation is really deep and really important across sciences, not just over here.
Wow, that's a great, and I haven't heard of, I think you mentioned Karl Popper before, but I hope that I can get around to reading some of this, because everything you just framed is, I've actually discovered some of this on my own in my work, in my practice. These, that's one thing I'm kind of curious to hear what you guys, if you've had this experience in your own life of this structure working in some way.
I'll tell you my experience on this structure is so simple. I teach technology founders how to obtain product market fit, which is a challenge for anybody starting a tech company on whether they can take the technology and make it fit in the market, and will it take traction. And I start by the whole idea of proper problem formulation. And I start by saying why, if you don't have proper problem formulation, nothing else will matter as you go into discovering whether your technology will fit in the market or not. So problem formulation turns out to be the starting point for investigating fuzzy, vague situations, such as will my technology work in the landscape, in the modern business landscape?
Nice. So that is, it's definitely the very parallel, or sounds like it's the same process.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in my practice, one of the things that I did because I've been in practice for almost 25 years, so it's getting close to that. I had some excellent teachers, and one of my favorite teacher, he taught us that before you start doing anything corrective to the body, you have to assess properly. And you do that by palpation, it's called. So you're touching the body, and it takes a lot of practice to know what the touching will tell you. And then he says, okay, from there, once you know what the landscape is, so you're looking for muscles that are either overactive or underactive, you're looking for adhesions. And then you start to your best guess, and so you come up with an assessment that and a potential approach, and then you try out your approach, and then you reassess by touching the muscles again to see if anything changed, or sometimes it's range of motion or even pain level for the client. And so the whole process is one of figuring out what reality has to say, putting some stimulus into the situation, and then measuring if it had the desired effect. So, and he said the problem with most practitioners is they try to decide ahead of time in their heads without any interaction with reality what to do. And he said this is actually true of a lot of doctors, by the way. And then you come up, and you try to get fancy up here before you have any interaction with reality. And that's when I started to really understand what he said, the effectiveness of my work just went through the roof. So
it's funny you say that, because in everything in technology, innovation and technology building, the idea is, and any complex dynamical system, there's an idea of sharp questions that allow you to reframe problems. And then rather than create a grand hypothesis, you do series of tests, stimuli response. And that reveals which of these problems can be solved and what answers will work. So this idea of what we call MVP, minimal viable product testing, you build a little, test a little, learn a little, and keep going through that. That iterative process is foundational to innovation.
Oh, that's exactly the process I discovered.
Yeah.
What about you, Kim? I mean, you're a coder, right? So don't you must do that similar thing, I would guess.
In some instances, yes. I'm a little bit. There's a question that I really want to ask first here. It has to do with the measurement problem. So I think in one of the previous episodes, 25 or 26, he introduces the meta crisis, the concept of the meta crisis, which is that's a formulation of a problem, is how I understand that. And he does point out that the practice of science is a contributing factor to that crisis. Nonetheless, there's value to be had through the practice of science. So in the example that you gave, Michael, you said you measure after the fact, after the stimulus, after the application of whatever the work is. But what I really want to poke at a little bit is that that's not measurement in the same vein that would be falsifiable for sure in a mathematical sense.
Can you just a little more detail about that part? Not falsifiable because
how would you falsify it? How would you falsify what you're referring to as the measure? Because maybe I'm wrong, but I'm assuming when you're putting hands on another body, the measure is a sensation in the body.
Well, it's a tonus in the body, but there's a couple. Well, one of the ways I cross-reference that is I have multiple ways of testing. So I can feel, and I can do functional muscle testing, and now I actually have a nervous system measuring device that shows what the nervous system's response is. So that's a third-party mechanical measurement. And then also I can ask the client, if they feel any different, because often they're in pain. So, part of the measurement is partly verified by their report. And if there's I don't feel any different, if I feel the tissue is different, but they don't feel any better, then then it's in a sense falsifiable by their report. I would think, at least potentially.
Okay, so you have what's that called?
Multifactorial, or
Yes,
multifactorial measurements,
yeah,
cross-referencing, right? I mean, it's like, and of course, it's not a perfect system. Nothing is, because sometimes there's errors. But I mean, the main thing the main measurement that I use actually is the client's report when they leave, after the session and when they come back, because that's it's their life. It's the goal is for them to feel better and be more functional, and that's my goal. And that's the main measurement. And then I try to get there by other measurements that they don't understand usually.
yeah.
What they understand is their body experience and the body reports. So,
Yeah,
but I
which
get
is
your point.
that's the sample of one. So back at the application in my own life, like I feel like I'm in the domains of where I've been trained. Like I'm pretty good at the application of the scientific method in a very narrow domain. I liked Anurag's introduction of that word conjecture, conjecture, which is a mathematical term, I think. But it feels to me anymore as I go through my days, professional and otherwise, I wake up and I have an idea of where I want to go. So like I'm navigating the day according to a story that I think I know what the story is, but then I invariably find out that it's not right. And the more interesting, larger part of that discovery is not a measurable. It's a subjective, sensational phenomena.
So
That navigational process.
So the
It's
clarification
based on feeling and feedback.
the clarification I would make is very narrow. Entire Karl Popper and the theory we're talking about is about solving a problem, and from a scientific perspective at least. So it's not about solving daily problems of life, emotional or otherwise. It is that if you want to accumulate knowledge that you can count on over time,
Yeah.
then you would have to follow a set of hypotheses and that are built from conjecture. And then you would have to make some predictions. Then you'll have to run experiments, and the experiments will have to be tested against your predictions. And based on that, you will have some errors, and you will have to reformulate your theory till you correct the error and you get more evidence and so forth. So the entire idea of knowledge accumulation in the scientific sense of the word is what this Karl Popper is talking about through the possibility of falsifiability. It has nothing to do with all the other knowledge that we might have that is not falsifiable or not even testable, but we live by it, we run our lives by it, but that doesn't, in the scientific sense of the word, count as knowledge that is cumulative. So Karl Popper's view is theory of science and narrow view of that. Whereas this is a generalized view that whenever you are stuck with a problem which seems to be open to a simple logical analysis or breaking it down into parts and running an algorithm on it, maybe you need to step outside and reformulate.
Oh, I see. So I see what you're doing is you're contrasting Popper's kind of framing with what Vervaeke is saying about how that even Popper's approach it's limited, is what you're saying.
Popper's the approaches are parallel. They have similar characteristics, but they serve different goals. Vervaeke's approach is to set up a psychological, epistemological framework on how intelligibility works. And Popper's approach is how do you solve problems by creating scientific knowledge that is robust. Right? And you do that through conjecture and course correction, error correction, and through prediction and running experiments. If you don't have ability to course correct or through experimentation and prediction, then you're not in the realm of science. But you might very well be in the realm of other behaviors and other areas.
Wow,
you don't.
interesting. Very interesting. Oh, very
So that
fascinating.
sounds like um,
I bring this
the
up. Go ahead,
but
Cam. Ask your question. Sorry.
um, so the argument for so Vervaeke, like I said, how he says um, science contributes to this meta crisis. Nonetheless, there's value to be had from it, and he is a cognitive scientist, and that the the accumulation. So I'm hearing you, Anurag, say that that is necessary in order to accumulate robust knowledge over time,
I don't
which
think at any place in the history so far, Vervaeke is questioning the value of scientific method or the
Right.
contribution of science.
he's not questioning, he's
Yeah.
pointing out that it contributes to the problem that he's
O-
trying to.
only by the fact, not inherent because of science, but only by
Right.
the fact that it lets go of people pay too much attention to only the science and not to the rest of it. It's an error of omission
Mhm.
and not an error inherent in science,
Right.
according to Vervaeke so far.
Yeah, he's saying that science isn't defective. It's just that people are only looking at things through that one perspective and not the rest of it, right?
It yeah, it necessarily imposes an extreme bias in order to practice it properly. As you got to be able to measure
Yeah.
the result.
Yeah,
Was
but
it?
that's, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that um, it's a certain way of approaching a problem or defining things. But I mean, how I heard it said recently that science doesn't tell you what anything's for. It just
Yeah.
tells you what it is. And that's the problem, is that, you want to know that part. You want to know what it is. You want to know it's what it's made of, but that doesn't help you know how to use it or relate to it. And that's the part I think that Vervaeke's saying, is you have to have both of those, because otherwise you don't know what to do with it. And the relevance is one of those too. What do I focus on is partly a scientific issue, but it's a meaning issue, right? Which is not necessarily fact-based. It's more like, what is it that I'm trying to, I'm not sure. Well, we'll see how he defines this, but what is it I'm aiming at in life determines what you see and what's relevant to where you're headed, right? So this is it's just that quantum physics thing, that the minute that you focus on one goal, it collapses all the other possibilities, right? That sort of thing.
Is your concern, I'm trying to figure out what's the question you're struggling with, Cam.
I don't feel like I'm struggling with the question. I'm pointing out that there's that other part, the dialogue that we're conducting feels predominantly scientifically. It feels focused on the scientific method, and it's not so far in this evening's discussion addressing that which cannot be addressed scientifically.
The way I see it is that until last chapter, when he talked about the clash, he was talking about historical trends, and he talked about how the clash based on historical trends resulted in collapse of meaning. And when he talks about the meta crisis of meaning, I'm going back to my notes. He basically says that for us to get through the meta crisis of meaning, we need to change how we think about consciousness, cognition, character, culture, community. These are all the things that we need to wrap our minds around, that used to be done by religion and now has been blown apart to different bits, where some bits are done by science, some not at all, some left to your own devices. And he's saying the alternatives that emerged post-science, such as the Marxist ideological view or Nazis fascist view, both of those were propositional ideologies and utopias that resulted in bloodbath. So you can't go down that path. And you can't go down the fundamentalist path of nostalgia towards some distant religious history. So he frames the issue that we have a crisis. He doesn't say it's because of science. He's saying because all other aspects around us have collapsed. And he summarizes it by saying that we need a God beyond God, and we need a religion that's not a religion. So he is pointing to the need for something new, but he's not putting the blame on anything. What's new and different is that once he gets to that, it's like his next few chapters are completely different from his historical discourse. He's now saying that was that. I'm going to now start laying the groundwork for my cognitive science theory. So we are now in the realm of cog science. We're not in the realm of history or historical interpretation or trends or who said what. He's now starting with last chapter on cog science, where he defines the 5 branches of cog science that need to be integrated. He's basically now steaming through the foundation of concepts in cog science. That's it. In order to achieve this idea of relevance realization and his contribution to meaning making. So he's now trying to build the entire edifice from bottom up, from cog science. He's no longer trying to tie it back to this is what Hegel says, and this is what cog science is saying. This is what scientific limitations were, and this is what cog science is saying. So I think you could almost look at from last chapter onwards, a completely new, fresh set of concepts that he's introducing for the first time, all centered around cog science.
Yeah.
Which I believe he defines as a synoptic integration.
Synoptic integration of 5 disciplines, 5 specific.
Do you have the 5 disciplines at your fingertips there? Can you rattle them off?
Yeah. He says 1 is anthropology, which talks about culture. 2nd, linguistics, that talk about language. 3rd, psychology, that talks about behavior. Computer science, AI, that talks about information processing. And neuroscience, that talks about brain. And he's saying these 5 branches are independent streams right now, but rightfully belong because the study of mind, which is where the meaning making is possible, is fragmented unless you start combining insights around from all these 5 areas into a set of insights that cut across them. That's what he means by synaptic integration. So,
and he makes the point, I think
that's what he's building now.
And in order to do that, there was he talked about, this was very helpful for me anyway, the problem of equivocation with respect to terms in the face of the reality that we can't get out of use of metaphor.
Right.
Which, as I understood, like those 5 disciplines, you're gonna encounter the same terms in them, but they don't mean the same thing.
Exactly right.
So
right.
being able to
right.
How did he talk about that? What's the term used for negotiating? That's not the term. Between the
he basically says cognitive science is profound synaptic integration that addresses the equivocation, fragmentation, and ignorance across these 5 areas.
Yeah.
And he calls it multi-apt, like a way to create multiple metaphors that are apt and actually are meaningful.
Yeah. Yes. Multi-apt. That was a key point.
As in appropriate. Apt as in appropriate.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like I've kind of dragged us back an episode. Thank you for letting me do that and get caught up with you.
It was helpful, though. I'm glad that you did, and you kind of reviewed there's 5 different disciplines, or and I wanted to inject something here that's really fascinating. One of the therapeutic protocols I use in my office, called the focus system, it reorganizes the brain's relationship to the body and to the brain to itself through modified music stimulation and specific neuro exercises. And it basically falls into the category of therapeutic play. And the thing that's so fascinating about what we're studying right now and talking about right now is that when I studied to be certified to use it, they explained that when someone has PTSD or ADD or ADHD or depression or anxiety, what's happening is that the subconscious system is not able to process the stimulus in the environment and categorize it properly so that it will tell you what to focus on that is most relevant to the best outcome in the moment. And
Yes.
because that's mostly decided by your subconscious system. Yeah, and it's called neuroception in polyvagal theory. And it's incredible that when we came to this chapter, I'm like, this is the same stuff. Now the thing I think is interesting though is that in my experience is that I'm now understanding more than ever that you can't do all of this logically. You have to actually stimulate the body and mind in a specific way, which like Rafe does in his stuff. And so that it actually organizes for you, so to speak.
Yeah.
So the relevance is actually sorted out by your biology, by your physiology, when it's properly oriented. And it's not so much effort, which again that's where you're stepping out of the thinking and into the being part, that if the being is properly oriented, then the relevance is more it's just salient to the moment. Like in the moment, you are able to say, or even to the problem solving thing, is because it's an orientation that's intuitive rather than overly intellectual. And I'm not saying the intellectual doesn't have a part, but that's a really interesting thing for me to see in relationship to what we're talking about.
Thank you for saying that. Like I can relate to that on practically a daily basis. I get it happened to me like an hour before this call tonight, where I get to the point in the day where I literally don't know where to put the thing, like what category. I think I spent like 5 minutes trying to slot one thing into a category that when the body is in its proper form isn't even a thing. It just happens.
Yeah, it's intuitive, right? So it's like the athlete that just feels their way into the move, right? It's not, or even it doesn't have to be the athlete. It could be anybody that's really good at what they do. The cook, the mother, the mother just knows how to hold the baby. She's not like, well, I wonder what I should do. She just feels, or even a father, how to hold the baby to calm them down, or whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter what your task is that when you're tuned in physiologically properly and oriented properly, regulated, they like to call it, then it's intuitive. And Dr. Porges, he actually says that when your nervous system is in the state of social engagement, then it's spontaneously desirable and to be connected to others, and your behavior is agreeable to most people because of how you intuitively show up and respond to everything. And so it's a physiological platform. It's not a way of thinking. The thinking comes from the physiological platform, not the other way around, for the most part. So that I just wanted to interject that because I thought when I was reading this, I was just like, holy shit, this is the same stuff that is, that I use in my office to help people with chronic conditions. It's actually helping the relevance realization mechanism within their own nervous system to be more effective. Interesting.
Indeed. So what I would suggest is that we pause here because the next chapter, 28, is pretty big.
I agree.
And we should pick that up next time. That allow us to, that is called Convergence Towards Relevance Realization. And it introduces several concepts. And the chapter 29 is getting into the depths of relevance realization. So we could probably use those two chapters next time.
I think I agree. Yeah, that's because we'll need the time to sort it out.
Yes. And it's okay if you go back and forth, by the way, Cam. You were absolutely right. Going back to pick up some concepts you might have dropped or not covered as much and bring them back. So I think we're at a stage where there will be several ideas that we are trying to stitch together. And it's okay to go back and forth a little bit to start making sure that we are building the blocks of what he's laying out.
Yeah, great. That
Nice.
sounds good to me. Wow. We're getting pretty deep here. This stuff is really worth the journey, in my opinion.
Yes, indeed. And the two thinkers, as I said, one is Karl Popper around the problem and epistemology, and other one who applies Karl Popper is David Deutsch, the one I had recommended earlier in his book towards the beginning of infinity and fabric of reality. He's a physicist. Both Karl Popper and they stitch together some of those concepts of epistemology quite well.
Oh, I was going to say, Anurag, I actually did read the book on bullshit. It was really fascinating, actually.
Short and sweet.
And very insightful, actually, that, bullshit's worse than lying, because at least the liar knows that there's a truth. That was something. Anyway, yeah. Cam, it's a real short read, so
I own it. I've been through it a bunch
Yes,
of times.
oh, okay, you already know. But it was my first time through, and I was like, wow, that was really interesting. Framing of that, I was intrigued. So
And comical.
Okay.
yes, I agree. It was quite fun, a fun one, right?
Yeah.
Good.
All right.
On
Wow.
that note, I will stop for today.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.